You think family drama only happens in movies? Not here, on Booze. And every story is real. Every tear is true. And revenge sometimes. It's paid in blood. The rain had fallen for 3 days straight, a ceaseless gray curtain that blurred the world outside the airport window. John stood by the glass, his military duffel at his feet, and watched the water streak down in long, uneven lines. 2 years in the African conflict zones had taught him to read the weather. And in that moment he thought this rain isn't about the sky, it's about endings. The message had come 2 weeks earlier. Your father has passed away. It was sent by his older brother Henry. John had read the short line again and again, feeling the words scratch against the inside of his mind like dry sand. His father, the stern, quiet man who had built everything they owned, gone. And now he was standing here in the same city he once swore he'd never return to, carrying a soldier's silence inside him. As he exited the terminal, the cold air hit him like a slap. A black sedan was waiting by the curb. Henry's driver, the same old man who had worked for their family for years, stepped out, eyes low. "Welcome home, Mr. John," he said quietly. "Your brother asked me to bring you straight to the house." John nodded, slid into the back seat and stared out the window. The city had changed. Taller buildings, new shops, more people. Yet it felt smaller somehow, as if everything had shrunk to fit the narrow corridors of memory. In the glass reflection, John saw the faint outline of his own face. Leaner now, harder, his eyes shadowed by something war had carved into him. He remembered the day he left Kat standing at the station, her hair tied back, her eyes full of both pride and fear. He had promised her he would come back. He had promised her he would marry her. As the car rolled through the city streets, he caught flashes of his past like broken mirrors. The schoolyard, the old cafe, the park bench where he had once held Kat's hand under the rain. It felt like another lifetime, one that didn't belong to him anymore. The mansion came into view, looming at the end of the long driveway lined with oak trees. Its lights burned through the mist like eyes watching him approach. He felt a tightening in his chest. Not grief, not yet, but something heavier, darker. Inside, everything looked the same. The portraits of ancestors, the marble floors, the smell of cedar and old money. Yet there was an absence. His father's voice, his presence, the quiet authority that once filled every room. Henry appeared at the top of the staircase. He looked older, more polished than John remembered. Expensive suit, confident smile. John Henry said, walking down. "You made it back." "I did." They shook hands. For a brief moment, John thought he saw guilt flicker in Henry's eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "I'm sorry about father," Henry said smoothly. "It all happened so suddenly. A heart attack. The doctors did everything they could." John's jaw tightened. He always took care of himself. He wasn't sick. Stress. Henry replied simply. "Running the business alone, managing everything after you left? It took a toll." John didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the wall. His father standing between him and Henry. He remembered how proud the old man had been the day John decided to serve. Henry noticed his gaze and said softly, "He left the estate in both our names. But we'll talk about that later. You need rest." John's mind buzzed. Both our names. His father had promised him the house and part of the company before he enlisted, but he let it go for now. He turned toward the living room and froze. There, arranging flowers in a crystal vase, was a woman. Her hair, her posture, the way she tilted her head. He would have recognized her anywhere. Kat. The world tilted. Her hands trembled when she looked up and saw him. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. 2 years of letters that never came, of hope that had died without a grave. "John," she whispered. But before she could take a step toward him, Henry's arm slid around her shoulders. "You remember, Kat?" Henry said casually. "My wife." The words fell like stones into John's chest. He felt the air leave his lungs, the ground shift beneath him. He forced himself to stay still, his soldier's discipline locking every muscle. "Yes," John said quietly. "I remember." Kat lowered her eyes. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but Henry's hand tightened slightly and she fell silent. John's heart burned. Not with anger yet, but with something far worse, confusion. Betrayal, disbelief. A slow, dawning horror that the two people he had trusted most in the world had rewritten his life without him. That night, John lay in his old room, staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but the silence was louder than any storm. In his mind, he kept seeing Kat's face, pale, distant, framed by the golden band on her finger. He had once told Henry, "If something happens to me, take care of her." And Henry had. Too well. John woke before dawn as he had in the Highlands, where sunrise came like a blade through the fog and sent men to their posts before they had the chance to feel fear. Here, the house breathed in the darkness, the soft tick of a grandfather clock, a distant gurgle in the pipe's floorboards, remembering footsteps that would never pass again. He sat up and let the room resolve into edges. The wardrobe, the desk, the leather chair where his father once sat to talk to him man to man, the phrase always so heavy with rules and love, and that awkward effort to bridge a generational sea. He dressed without turning on the light, moving by the muscle memory of childhood. When he reached the mirror, he paused. There were faint scars he didn't have 2 years ago. Not the dramatic lines of heroism, but the subtle geography of months uncounted, a nick below the chin, from a blade used too quickly, a pale crescent at the temple, where a stone had struck when a convoy swerved off a bad road. But the real change was in the eyes, a stillness that belonged to men who had seen too much and had learned to put it down in a locked room inside themselves. Downstairs, the housekeeper had left coffee in a thermos. John poured it into a cup and drank, standing by the window, watching the garden yield to ash-blue light. The roses his father cut every Sunday were untended, their red gone dark and angry petals sagging with the last rain. He set the cup down and picked up a framed photograph from the sideboard, his father at the shipyard, hard hat under one arm, sun cutting his features into lines that looked carved rather than grown. Behind him, the skeletons of ships, ribs, spines, emerged from welded seams, things that would one day move under their own purpose. He didn't just die, John said aloud to the empty room, surprised at the shape his suspicion made in the air. It had hovered since the airport like a fly that wouldn't be swatted. Heart attack. Yes, it happened. But his father was careful to the point of superstition. Morning jogs, low-salt checkups marked on a calendar with neat blue ticks. And then there was Henry's voice on the phone, too, measured like someone walking across ice that he knew by heart but didn't trust. Footsteps came from the hall. Soft halted. He set the photograph down. Kat stood in the doorway, a cardigan drawn tight around her hair, twisted up in a hurried knot, the way she used to wear it while cramming for exams. She looked smaller in this house than he remembered. Or maybe the house had grown around her into something she could never belong to. "Can we talk?" she asked. He nodded and gestured toward the sitting room. They didn't turn on the lights. Dawn was enough. She sat at the edge of the couch, hands cupped together, the way you hold water you don't want to lose. John took the chair opposite, deliberately leaving the coffee on the sideboard, as if to announce this would not be a long or comfortable conversation. "I'm sorry," she began, and then tried again. "I'm so sorry, John." He waited. "I wrote to you," she said. "Every week at first, then every 2. I sent parcels, vitamins, socks, stupid things. They came back, or they vanished. And then the call." She stopped and pressed her fingers to her mouth. "Henry told me there was a report. Your unit was hit. He said you were missing in action. That there were signs, blood, a burned vehicle. They couldn't recover. He said the government would issue a certificate." I believed him. I had no reason not to. The room tightened around them. Somewhere a kettle clicked in the staff quarters, an ordinary sound that threw into relief the weight of the words between them. John swallowed hard. Missing in action. He had seen the stamp before. It was bureaucracy's way of saying we lost the thread and the narrative is safer than the truth. But why would a report reach Henry first orders and notifications were precise, hierarchical? Next of kin was their father. After him, John had listed his brother for emergencies, yes, but for a formal notice to come and not be routed to command to verify something was wrong. "How long after my deployment did Henry tell you this?" he asked. 7 months, she said. He waited, he said, because there was still hope. A witness had seen someone dragged from the wreck. He told me he didn't want to give me false. She broke off, turned her face away. "I wore black. I went to your father. He didn't speak for a long time, and then he said he would look after me as if I were still family. He kept giving me money for school. He told me to finish my degree. Henry arranged the payments. Then, after the heart attack, things changed." How, John asked, though part of him suspected. "The stipend stopped," she said flatly. "Henry said the estate had to be settled. He said your father had written a new will, and there were debts, big ones, tied to the shipyard. He said everything would be fine once the documents cleared, and in the meantime he proposed marriage. He told me it was what your father had wanted. That she forced herself to meet John's eyes. That your father had seen me as a daughter, and that I needed protection from the vultures who would come for me and for the little savings I had. John let the words pass through him, felt them lodge, felt the shape they made. Henry's voice was in them. The tone he used in deals warm, inevitable. Protection. That word had bought and sold 1,000 things in their world, most of them disguised as kindness. Did my father say that he wanted you to marry Henry? John asked carefully. No, she whispered. He didn't. We spoke the week before he died. He said... She stopped as if the sentence itself were a cliff. He said he wanted to see you home, that it was time to put things back where they belonged. Silence pooled. John's mind moved the way it had in ambushes, every detail catalogued, no room for panic, just the cold draft of logic. If his father had called Kat the week before and spoken lucidly about plans, if he had as ever kept his body as a disciplined instrument, then what changed in 7 days? Where was he when it happened, John asked. In his study, Kat said. He was working late. Henry found him in the morning. Of course Henry had found him. Of course Henry had the keys, the schedules, the domesticated rhythms of a house used to his walk. John could see the study, the decanter his father didn't drink, from the tidy stacks of reports, the small dish of pills in case rarely used. He could also see the safe behind the row of maritime law volumes, the safe his father had once opened to show him how a legacy is measured. Contracts, share certificates, not cash. Paper, gravity. Did you see the body, John asked, aware of the bluntness, unwilling to apologize for it. Yes, she said. He looked peaceful. The doctor said it happens. That people die sitting up as if they've paused to think. Henry handled everything. He told me not to worry. Her voice thinned. I was grieving. I didn't think to question. He leaned back, staring into a corner of the room where a painting hung crooked, a minor slant that irritated his father enough to fix it within a minute. Now no one had bothered. Details collapse when the spine of a house breaks. I need the death certificate, John said, and the will. Kat flinched. Henry keeps them. He said he'd show me when I had accepted the marriage. He made it sound like we were formalizing a protection you would have wanted. He said you had asked him before you left to make sure I wouldn't be alone. I asked him to look after you, John corrected softly. Not to rewrite the world. A flicker of something. Anger moved through Kat's eyes and was gone. Why didn't you write? She asked suddenly, the smallness in her voice giving way to a thin, bright thread. Why didn't you call even once? He closed his eyes. Dust storms. Power lines down for weeks. Radios that burned out in sudden surges. Units folded into other units, names misfiled. He had sent letters. 3, then another from a hospital cot where the roof fan rotated like a slow question. He had asked his medic friend Sammy to route a message through the embassy when a convoy passed the capital. He had waited for a single envelope in return. It never came. I did, he said at last. I sent what I could. Something happened to them. He thought of Henry again, of access of mail redirected through the family office of a brother who had once opened John's acceptance letter to a scholarship because he couldn't resist and needed to plan for both of us. He thought of that old habit of crossing thresholds without asking because we share everything, little brother. Kat looked down at her hands. When she spoke again, the words were steady. Henry told me you were dead because it made sense to him that you would be. It's what war does. And she swallowed. I learned to function in the grief. That grief became something else. A cage of gratitude, maybe. He paid for my last year of school. He sat front row at my white coat ceremony and cried like it was his pride to carry. And when he proposed, I didn't say yes immediately. But grief and dependency are cousins, John. They speak the same accent. In the end, I told myself I was choosing a future I could manage. Do you love him? The question surprised them both with its bluntness. It hung between them like a shard. She did not answer at once. When she did, it was with a clarity that left no room for comfort. I don't know what that word means anymore, she said. What I had with you. A breath, a small wreck. It felt like oxygen. What I have with him feels like a contract for air. The clock in the hall chimed 6, each note swallowing the one before like a snake eating its tail. John stood not to end the conversation, but to keep from imploding into it. He looked at the garden again, at the path his father used to walk in perfect straight lines, as if geometry were a prayer. "I'll talk to Henry," he said. "Be careful," Kat said quickly. "He isn't the same. Or maybe he's always been this way, and I didn't notice. He knows the law like the back of his hand. He knows the words that make things true even if they're not." John nodded. "Words do that," he said. "But paper can be read. Locks can be opened." She stood too. In the half-light, her face looked like a page someone had folded and unfolded too many times. Creases of decision, of retraction. "There's something else," she said. "The night your father died, I heard voices. I was on call at the hospital until late, but I came back because Henry told me to bring him soup. He said your father was working and wouldn't eat unless someone insisted. When I came in through the kitchen, I heard them arguing in the study. Your father's voice. Sharp. Henry's calm, but with that edge he gets when he's selling something. I didn't stay. I left the soup and went upstairs because it felt like I was walking into a private storm. In the morning." She looked at him. In the morning he was dead. The room cooled. Details reassembled around a new center of gravity. "What were they arguing about?" John asked. "I don't know," she said. "But 2 days earlier, a courier delivered a sealed envelope for your father. He signed for it personally. Henry tried to take it, and your father said, 'This one's for John when he returns.' I heard him say your name clear as the bell. I never saw that envelope again." John closed his hand into a fist, slowly feeling the controlled pressure in his palm, the promise implicit in restraint. When he spoke, it was almost gentle. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me." She nodded like someone accepting a small kindness after a long season of rationed ones. "Be careful," she repeated, and left as quietly as she had come. John stood alone with the dawn pressing against the windows. A soldier learns to measure his moves not by anger, but by information. He had pieces now, a disputed will, a vanished envelope, a brother who had announced a death without a body, a father who had argued on his last night with the son who stood to inherit most by erasing the other. He went to the study. The room smelled of paper and the faint antiseptic sweetness of old wood polish. His father's desk was immaculate even in absence. Pens in a straight line, a calendar with the last week crossed out until the day it stopped. John moved to the bookcase and slid the maritime law volumes aside until the safe revealed itself like a scar. He knelt, eyes drifting over the combination dial. His father had let him set it once when he was 14. "Choose something you'll never forget," the old man had said, watching, and John had laughed and spun the wheel to his mother's birthday, the date of a woman gone, but not gone in the way grief measures. He tried the numbers now. On the third turn, the bolt clicked. The sound was simple and entire. He breathed in and opened the door. Inside, everything was as memory promised. Folders, deeds, the shipyard's share registry, a thin blue notebook where his father logged private notes like a captain's journal. And there, tucked into the back, a plain envelope without insignia, sealed with the old-fashioned firmness of someone who believes tamper evident is a moral principle, not a product feature. The envelope was addressed in his father's slanted hand. For John upon his return. He held it. The paper was cool. He felt 17 and 37 at once. He slid it carefully with a letter opener and drew out the contents, a single-page letter, and a photocopy of a document stamped with an attorney's seal. He read the letter first. As his eyes moved, the room vanished. The words were his father's voice, unadorned, purposeful, with a touch of that late-in-life tenderness that had surprised John whenever it appeared. When he finished, he looked up at the door. The handle turned. Henry stood there, framed by the soft hallway light, smiling, as if they had both arrived at a comedy they'd seen before. "Early start," Henry said, stepping in. His gaze slid to the open safe, then to the paper in John's hand. The smile didn't move, but something behind it tightened with quick arithmetic. "Finding what you need." Little brother John didn't answer immediately. He folded the letter back into its envelope with slow, deliberate movements, the way one might sheath a blade rather than hide it. Henry stepped closer, polished shoes whispering across the marble floor. The scent of his cologne, subtle, expensive, deliberate, mingled with the dust and oil of the study. Henry's eyes flickered toward the safe and then to the paper still visible between John's fingers. "I didn't know you remembered the combination," he said lightly. "Father was quite particular about that." John turned, voice steady but low. "I remembered more than that." The words were calm, but beneath them was the edge of something forged in places where calm had a cost. Henry chuckled, pretending not to hear the warning. You've changed, John. The uniform suits you. You look composed. Cold, maybe. War does that, doesn't it? War teaches you how to see truth through smoke. Henry raised an eyebrow. And what truth have you found this morning? John's gaze met his brother's. That father left me something you didn't want me to see. Henry smiled. That smooth politician's smile he used in boardrooms and family dinners alike. You're mistaken. Everything of father's is ours now, equally. You'll see the paperwork soon enough. There's no need for what? John interrupted. Questions. Henry's smile froze for just a fraction of a second. For suspicion, he said finally. We've both lost enough. John took a step closer, his shadow falling across the desk. I asked you to protect Kat while I was gone. Henry's expression didn't change, but a faint muscle near his jaw trembled. And I did. You lied to her, John said quietly. You told her I was dead. Henry's tone hardened, though his smile stayed. I told her what she needed to hear. You disappeared for months. No contact, no word. She was breaking John. I did what I could to keep her sane. And in the end, we fell in love. It happens. John let the silence draw out. The only sound was the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. You stole my life, he said. You stole father's trust and hers. Henry laughed softly, the sound brittle. Stole. Don't dramatize, brother. Life doesn't belong to anyone. It moves on. People change. You think she'd wait forever? You think father didn't see that you'd chosen war over family? John's eyes narrowed. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself. Henry leaned on the desk, lowering his voice. You don't know what it was like here, John. The business was failing. Father's mind was slipping. He'd forget meetings, lose documents, start talking to your mother's photograph like she could answer. Someone had to keep things together. I did what you couldn't. You ran away from responsibility, and now you're angry that I picked up the pieces. John stared at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You always wanted what wasn't yours. Maybe, Henry said, eyes gleaming. But I've always been the one strong enough to take it. He turned to leave, but John's voice stopped him. What happened the night father died? Henry paused. His hand rested on the doorframe. Heart failure. You read the report. Kat heard you arguing with him. For a moment, Henry didn't move. Then he turned his smile thinner now. She told you that, did she? I should have known. Kat's too sentimental. That'll be her ruin. What were you arguing about? Henry took a slow step forward. You think you're the only one who suffered, John? You think your noble little adventure in the desert gives you the right to interrogate me in our father's house you left. You chose your duty over us. Don't come back now and pretend you care. I cared enough to come home, John said. Too late, Henry snapped. The words echoed off the study walls. Then, in a softer tone, almost mocking, he added, Father made a choice before he died. The estate's under my management until further notice. You'll have your share, of course, once you've adjusted to civilian life. You're not exactly stable yet. There it was, the hint of threat beneath civility. The suggestion that John the soldier with 1,000-yard stare might be too broken to hold power. John slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket. I'll read what father left, then we'll talk. Henry's eyes darkened. You won't find what you're looking for. Father was a complicated man. So am I. They stood there silent, locked in a tension that felt older than blood. Henry's expression finally broke into a smirk, and he turned to leave. Breakfast is in the dining hall, he said over his shoulder. Kat insists you join us. It'll be just like old times. When the door closed, John exhaled, slowly, deliberately. He opened the letter again. The letter read, My son, if you are reading this, I am gone. I wish I could have told you these things in person, but there was too much pride between us, yours and mine. You were right to serve. The world needs men who do not flinch. But here at home, men like your brother have learned to flinch at nothing, and that is far more dangerous. There are documents in the safe that Henry must not find. The real ownership papers of the shipyard, and the account records that show where the money has gone. I trusted him once. That was my mistake. He has debts, John. Not from failure, but from greed. He will try to cover them by claiming my death was natural, and by taking what was meant for you. Do not confront him yet. He is cunning, and the law favors the calm liar. Find evidence first. There is one man you can trust. Thomas Graves, our family's old lawyer. I sent him copies of everything. If something happens to me, he will know what to do. Be careful with Kat. She carries her own wounds and guilt makes people easy to use. Forgive her if you can. Hate destroys more than it heals. Whatever you do, do not let Henry see this letter. Your father, Richard Sullivan. John's eyes traced the signature. Strong, deliberate. The old man's hand had not trembled. His mind had been clear. He folded the letter again, heart steadying into resolve. There it was. The truth beneath the tragedy. His father had known. Outside, through the tall windows, the morning light had sharpened into gold cutting across the floor in narrow beams. Dust floated through it like quiet ghosts. He looked once more at the safe, then at the door Henry had walked through. The war was not over. It had simply changed its battlefield. The dining room was a cathedral of polished wood and quiet deceit. Sunlight bled through the tall windows, glancing off silverware so precisely arranged it looked more ceremonial than practical. The scent of coffee and butter lingered faintly, domestic comforting, but beneath it John sensed something metallic. Not blood, not quite. Tension. Kat sat at the far end of the table, her hands folded around a teacup she had not touched. Her wedding ring caught the light, a small cruel circle that seemed to mock both of them. Henry, already seated, read the morning paper with theatrical ease. When John entered, Henry folded the paper neatly and smiled. "Ah, our hero joins us," he said. "Sit, brother. Kat was just saying we should pray before eating. You remember father's old habit?" John took the seat opposite him, the same one he'd sat in countless childhood mornings when their father presided at the head. Now the head chair was empty, and the absence was so loud it nearly hummed. "I remember," John said. His voice was calm, but his fingers traced the wood grain of the table as if memorizing it for the last time. Henry bowed his head, briefly, murmured something too fast to be sincere, then reached for the coffee pot. "So," he said, pouring himself a cup. "Tell me about Africa. Was it everything they promised, sand, sweat, and glory?" John took a slow sip of water before answering. "Mostly sand. Not much glory." Henry chuckled. "You always were the romantic. Thought war would cleanse the soul. Turns out it just dirties the boots, eh?" John didn't rise to the bait. He studied his brother's face. The easy arrogance, the faint lines at the corners of his mouth that deepened when he lied. War had taught John to read people like terrain. Henry's smile was the kind that hid trenches. Kat spoke softly, breaking the silence. "I heard they stationed you near the border zones." John nodded. "Mostly humanitarian routes, supply protection, the usual." Her voice was careful, neutral. "You must have seen terrible things." "I saw men do what they thought they had to," John said. His eyes flicked briefly to Henry. "And then live with it." Henry's fork froze mid-air, then clinked softly as he set it down. "We all do what we must," he said evenly. "Especially to survive." Kat shifted uncomfortably. Her gaze darted between them. The brothers, two sides of the same coin, now tarnished beyond polish. "Please," she said quietly. "Can we not?" Henry cut her off gently but firmly. "It's fine, darling. John and I are just reacquainting. He's missed a lot." "Yes," John said, voice low. "I have." He reached into his jacket almost idly and set a folded envelope beside his plate. Henry's eyes flicked to it, recognition flickering like a struck match. "What's that?" he asked. "Something father left me," John replied. "A letter." Henry's smile froze. "Ah, the sentimental kind." "Not exactly." The air shifted. Even Kat seemed to feel it. The way stillness before a storm feels alive, humming in the bones. Henry leaned back, masking unease behind casual posture. "I see." "And what did he say in this mysterious letter?" John's answer came slow, deliberate. "He said he trusted me to finish what he couldn't. That there were debts to be settled. Truths to be unearthed." Henry's eyes narrowed. "That sounds dramatic, John. You know how father loved his riddles?" "Do I?" John asked. Because his handwriting was very clear. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Henry forced a laugh. "You think father suspected foul play?" "Come on, he died in his chair, for God's sake." "The man was old, stubborn, tired. You can't turn every death into a mystery." "Maybe not every death," John said softly. "But some deserve questions." Kat's voice trembled. "John." He turned to her, and his tone softened. "I'm not accusing. I just want to know what really happened." He wrote that he argued with someone about the company. That someone was making decisions behind his back. Henry's face hardened, the charm slipping like a mask left out in the rain. "And you think that was me?" "I think you were the only one close enough to lie to his face." The words landed with a quiet violence. Henry stood his chair, scraping sharply against the floor. "Careful," he said. "You've been home one day, and already you're looking for enemies. That's not healthy. You've seen too much war. Maybe you're bringing it home with you." John rose too. Maybe it never left. Kat stood abruptly between them. "Stop it, both of you! This isn't what he would have wanted." John looked at her, then at Henry, and for a moment the room held three ghosts. The boy who went to war, the man who stayed behind, and the woman caught between them. Henry exhaled slowly, forcing composure. "I'm not your enemy, John, but I won't have you disrupting this family. Father's gone, the company's under my care, and you need time. Time to remember where you belong." "I remember perfectly," John said. Their eyes locked, two wills sharpened by different kinds of battle. Then just as suddenly, Henry smiled again. "Fine," he said. "If you're so convinced, go ahead. Talk to the lawyers, dig through the papers. You'll find nothing but dust and good intentions." He picked up his napkin, tossed it lightly onto the plate. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have meetings." He turned and left the room. His footsteps echoed down the hall, measured and confident, but John caught the faintest quiver in them, the rhythm of someone no longer entirely sure of the ground beneath his feet. Kat stood silently, her shoulders shaking just slightly. "He'll ruin you," she whispered. "He's not the brother you remember." John looked at her, and the anger drained, replaced by something heavier. Sorrow, maybe, or the bitter taste of understanding. "No," he said. "He's exactly the brother I remember. I just never saw what that meant." Kat's eyes glistened. "What are you going to do?" He looked out the window toward the shipyard visible in the distance. Cranes frozen mid-lift, their arms like crosses against the sky. "I'm going to find the truth," he said. "And when I do, I'll make him see what he's done. Not with bullets, but with what he fears most: exposure." Kat nodded slowly, almost fearfully. "And if you can't forgive him?" John's gaze hardened. "Then I'll outlive him." That night the rain returned. Not a storm this time, but a steady drizzle that whispered against the windows like the soft ticking of a clock. John sat in his father's study once more, the letter open beside him. Maps of the shipyard spread across the desk. Every mark, every line was a piece of the empire his father had built, and the empire Henry had tried to steal. Outside, a car door slammed. He glanced up. Through the window, he saw Henry on the phone near the driveway. His expression tense, voice low, words lost to the wind. But John recognized the gesture. The restless flick of the hand, the habit of lying even when no one was watching. John leaned back in the chair that once belonged to his father. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched faintly. War had taught him patience. Revenge would too. He whispered almost to himself, "This time I fight at home." The law firm smelled like old paper and polished restraint. Brass nameplates lined the corridor, partners' surnames stamped into time. Yet only one door was slightly ajar, its hinge protesting the same way an old knee does when it knows rain is coming. On the frosted glass, Thomas Graves, ESQ. John paused a second with his hand on the knob. In the hallway mirror, a soldier stared back, jaw-set eyes flat enough to skim a stone across. He heard his father's voice like a low bell. "The law favors the calm liar. So learn to be calmer than the liar." He went in. Thomas Graves rose from behind a broad oak desk, tall in that stooped way men become when they've spent too many years leaning over other people's consequences. His hair was gunmetal, his suit a clean charcoal, his eyes, blue bloodshot at the rims, took John in with a recognition that hurt. Richard's chin. Graves said softly, then added, "And Margaret's stare." He gestured to the chair. "Sit, John." They didn't waste time on condolences. The air itself felt allergic to small talk. "I have your father's letter." John began taking the envelope from his inner pocket. "He says you have copies of everything." Graves unlocked a drawer with a key on a leather fob and placed a thin file on the desk, not pushing it forward yet, as if proximity itself were an oath. "Your father came to see me 3 months before he died," the lawyer said. "He was lucid, angry, determined. He suspected Henry of moving assets off the books, shell companies, debt cycling, shadow guarantees. All legal in appearance, none legitimate in intent." John's mouth thinned. Shell's debt shadow. The vocabulary felt like a map of fog roads you could trace but never touch. "How?" he asked. Graves flipped the file open. "The shipyard uses a lattice of suppliers. Steel, fuel, spare parts. A standard industry hedge is to create a captive supplier to stabilize prices. Henry did the inverse. He created multiple vendors, Oaktide Metals, Tethys Fuels, Brindle Logistics, and papered them as arm's-length firms. On paper, they are independent. In reality, they roll up to a BVI holding, Alpheus Holdings Limited, whose sole director is a nominee from a Panamanian trust. We traced signatures. I'm not a court, but I am a reader. It's Henry. Skimming and more. Inflating input costs to drain cash, then lending the same cash back to the shipyard through a different entity, Carthage Capital, at punishing interest. A company robbing itself, then borrowing its own blood at a premium. John pictured cranes lifting empty air books fat with numbers carrying nothing. Why didn't Father stop him? He tried. Graves slid a photocopied memo forward. Richard's handwriting in the margin stern and surgical. Your father revoked Henry's standalone signing authority. He required dual signatures for contracts above a threshold. He drafted a codicil to his will to place the shipyard shares in a protective trust with you as primary trustee upon his death. Codicil, John repeated, tasting the steel in the word. Where is it? Graves's jaw flexed, filed, dated, witnessed, and then contested by Henry. He claims your father revoked the codicil the week before his death and signed a new will leaving management control to him until the younger son demonstrates stability. The last word carried a lawyer's contempt. Stability, as in a doctor's note saying I'm unfit, John said flatly. He could already smell Henry's cologne on the paperwork, citrus money disinfected intention. Graves nodded once. He's not subtle. He filed a petition for temporary conservatorship over your voting rights on the grounds of prolonged exposure to combat potential PTSD difficulty reintegration. He even cited a journal article. John smiled without humor. He never read journal articles unless they paid him. His new counsel does, Graves said. They're good at this. They don't need truth, only coherence. A silence opened. John let it fill with something cold that didn't shake. What do we have? He asked. Graves turned a page. Bank statements from the shipyard's primary account show anomalous transfers to Oaktide and Tethys, amounts that round to cleanly dates that hug quarter ends, like they were scheduled for optics. I have invoices with serial numbers that skip in patterns. Someone's printer got lazy. I have a shipping manifest where the tonnage of sheet steel delivered exceeds the steel rolled by 12%. Physics is my favorite witness steel that doesn't become ships becomes a story. Can we tie Alpheus Holdings to Henry directly? Not yet. Indirectly, several routes. Graves slid over a stapled packet corporate registry's black bars a chessboard of ownership. A nominee director in Panama is also a director at a boutique firm in the Caymans that services Surprise Carthage Capital. The email domain for Alpheus's administrator was registered by a marketing firm here in the city. The marketing firm's rent is paid by a holding company whose registered office is our shipyard's old legal address. The map tightened. So we pull the thread, John said. We do, Graves replied. But when you pull a thread in public, the suit unravels on the person wearing it. Henry will claim you're stripping the company to spite him. He will file injunctions. He will wave your service record like a flag of pity and paint me as the doddering friend of a dead man. John considered the battlefield. He will paint. So I will etch. Then we need evidence a judge can understand without a degree in offshore hypocrisy. Graves' mouth twitched. Your father said that too. A judge likes numbers that balance and objects that fit on a table. He suggested 3 objects, a ledger, a key, and a bolt. Explain. The ledger, your father's private notebook. Graves tapped the file. He recorded his observations, unreconciled transfer, supplier conflicts, meetings Henry forgot to schedule. The key, a hardware token for 2-factor authentication to the shipyard's legacy banking portal. He replaced it 3 months ago and held onto the old token as proof of who accessed what when. The bolt, a warehouse security camera, analog, not networked, pointed at loading bay 3 where steel deliveries are weighed. Your father suspected someone was double weighing, clocking tonnage twice to bill twice. So he had an independent scale installed and told no one. John felt something click in him, like a rifle bolt returning to battery. Where are they? The ledger is here. Graves slid out a blue notebook, edges frayed, the left margin annotated in that tidy engineer's hand. Richard never surrendered. The key and the camera tapes are not. He kept the token in his study safe for a time, then moved it to a different safe, one you don't know. Henry found them, John said, feeling the words test the room for cracks. Or is still looking, Graves replied. Either way, if we find the independent scales paper trail, the maintenance company, the electrician's invoice, we can prove foreknowledge and isolate the delta between reported and actual weights. Add to that the banking logs showing which credential authorized vendor payments at odd hours. John flipped through the ledger. His father's notes were spare, almost cold dates, amounts, initials. 317 Oaktide 850K, no delivery logged, H signed, and later 430 Carthage bridge loan. 2.4M at 11%, paid with same cash from Oaktide invoices. Circular. In the margin, one line underlined twice. If I die, this is the cause. He placed a fingertip on the sentence until the paper absorbed the heat of his skin. We take this to the police, he said. Graves shook his head. Not yet. White-collar units are slow, and Henry will spin it as a civil dispute. We go to probate court first. We argue to admit the codicil and freeze any further transfers. If a judge issues a temporary restraining order on the company's accounts, pending an independent audit, you starve the shell companies. Henry will panic. Panicked men make procedural mistakes. And Cat John asked, the name arriving like a soft bruise. She's inside the house Henry is staging from. Graves held his gaze. We cannot protect everyone from everything, but we can reduce the blast radius. I'll file the probate motion today. You keep your distance for 48 hours. Let the order land before you confront. John's jaw worked. 48 hours. 2 nights of pretending under someone else's roof. He nodded. Graves slid a final sheet across a business card, unremarkable, except for a handwritten number on the back. This is an auditor I trust. Independent, unglamorous, honest to boredom. He will look at the numbers the way surgeons look at blood loss. John pocketed the card. What will Henry do first? Try to discredit you, Graves said. He'll whisper that you're unwell. He'll offer to settle if you sign a mutual release that cedes management to him in exchange for cash. It will be generous on paper and poison in time. And if I refuse, he'll escalate. He'll rope Cat in as character witness. He will force you to choose between your father's truth and your oldest loyalties. John breathed through the ache. Choose. Again. Then we remove choice from the script, he said. We make the facts so plain that even Henry can only deny them by looking ridiculous. Graves' eyes warmed for the first time. Richard told me you'd come back sharpened. He was right. John stood. File the motion, he said. I'll find the bolt. The warehouse sat at the river's edge like a sleeping animal. Corrugated skin, a spine of rust along the roofline. By afternoon, the wind had shifted, bringing the smell of brine and oil. John passed the security post with a wave. The guard, new young, flattered by the uniform, didn't question the founder's son. Loading Bay 3 was quiet. He stood there a long moment listening. A warehouse has sounds the untrained don't hear: the click of cooling metal, the long throat clear of a forklift, rat feet writing poems under pallets. He followed the electrical conduit from the wall clock to a junction box, then another line that branched lower. 3 screws scored by a sloppy hand. Someone moved you recently, he thought. A maintenance ladder leaned nearby. He climbed, pried the cover with a pocket tool, found what he wanted. A spliced lead that fed a second device lower on the wall, painted over disguised as a patched dent. He tapped it. The hollow resonance replied. He scored the paint, peeled it, and there it was, a recessed camera mount, empty. He descended, went to the foreman's office. Inside, under a stale calendar and a fan that swatted air like a bored cat, a metal cabinet waited. He flipped through manila folders until he found S, Scale Bay 3, Calibration. A narrow invoice, 6 months old. Rutledge Instruments. Install secondary verification scale, discrete. The work order bore 2 initials, RS and TG. Richard Sullivan. Thomas Graves. He photographed the invoice with his phone, then put it back exactly where it had been. As he turned to leave, he noticed the desk drawer was missing a lock core, removed cleanly. Someone with keys, but not this key. Footsteps in the hall. Heavy, unhurried. He slipped the drawer shut and turned as Mark Delaney, the operations manager, filled the doorway. Barrel chest, red face, the particular confidence of a man who knows which forklifts secretly leak. He had been loyal to Richard in the practical way ships floated, workers paid. With Henry, loyalty had become an accounting entry. "Didn't know you were back," Delaney said. His eyes darted once to the cabinet. "Should have called." "I like to see things as they are," John replied. "Not as announced." Delaney scratched the back of his neck, left grease there like a signature. "Henry said you might swing by. Told me to help you however I can." The words were smooth. The emphasis on Henry landed like a warning. "Then help me," John said, motioning to the bay. "The secondary scale. Where's the unit?" Delaney's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Must be a misunderstanding. We only ever had the one. Budget cuts." John held his gaze. Let the silence do what questions sometimes can't. Delaney finally looked away. "You know how it is," he muttered. "Paper orders, then cancellations. Things above my pay grade." "Who canceled?" John asked. Delaney shrugged. "Procurement. Could pull the file if you want. Might take a day." He used the kind of day that means never. John stepped closer until Delaney could smell the truth on him. Dust storm patience. "Pull it," he said. "Now." The manager hesitated, then went to the terminal. He typed slowly, a man hoping the system would refuse him. It didn't. A record appeared. He printed it, face-pinched. John read installation order approved by R. Sullivan. Cancellation issued 5 days later by H. Sullivan. Note, redundant. Remove extra hardware. Dispose tapes. Signature clean and generous. "Where are the tapes?" John asked. Delaney's mouth opened-closed. If there were tapes, they'd be in the archive room. But that room's been reorganized. "By who?" Legal Delaney said quickly. "They took boxes the week after Mr. Sullivan passed. Said we were doing a compliance sweep." Compliance. The word put a medic smell in John's nose, iodine and how it fails. He took the printout, folded it once. "Show me the archive." Delaney led him down a corridor to a cinder-block room cooled by permanent shade and bad paint. Label shadows on shelves told a history the boxes no longer did. On the floor, a smear where something heavy had rested until recently. "Keys," John said. Delaney patted pockets. "I don't—" John reached over, lifted the keyring clipped to Delaney's belt like a pet. He found the right key by listening to how the metal wanted to fit its life. He opened the side cabinet. Inside 2 tapes, Bay 3, 0214, and Bay 3, 0228. Nothing for the month his father died. The absence felt designed. Delaney cleared his throat. "Those are blanks," he said too fast. John turned one over. On the back, a pen marked Cal. Calibration reference. Not blank. He slid both into his bag. "Thank you." Delaney took a half step as if to object, then thought better. "Henry won't like you walking out with company property," he said carefully. John's smile was quick and not kind. Then he should stop making company property out of the truth. He left the warehouse with the tapes and the cancellation order. The river wind cut through his jacket, sharpening his thinking until it whistled. Ledger. Key. Bolt. He had one. Maybe 1.5. The key, the token, was still missing. But tokens live where men feel safest: desks, bedside drawers, the pocket of a suit that isn't worn to funerals. He drove back to the house at dusk, the sky a bruised violet threaded with power lines. In the driveway, Henry's car was gone. The windows burned with the soft yellow of curated peace. Inside, the staff moved like a well-timed play. John went straight to the study, empty. He scanned the shelves, then the underside of the desk, wrapped wood. Found nothing. He stood in the doorway, thinking like a thief with a cause. His father's bedroom was the last place Henry liked to enter, too haunted by a man who never forgave laziness. John tried the door. It opened on air that still smelled faintly of cedar and old soap. He checked the dresser. Nothing. The wardrobe, a false bottom under a drawer. Click. Revealed a small velvet pouch. Inside, a hardware token scuffed its LCD window smudged. He pressed the button. A 6-digit code blinked into being, honeycomb segments humming their brief life. Found you. He took it, then paused. The smallest sound. A floorboard's elastic memory, in the hall. He closed the pouch, returned the drawer to its exact music, stepped into the bedroom's shadow as Henry's footsteps approached. The door opened. Henry stood there, tie loosened, phone to his ear, laughter doing cartwheels. It didn't feel. "I'm telling you he's harmless," Henry was saying. "We'll file tomorrow. Conservatorship first, then probate. The judge owes me a favor. No, not that kind. The respectable kind." He entered, went to the wardrobe, reached for the drawer John had just closed. Not that one, the one below it. He pulled out a different pouch, weighed it in his hand, put it back. He didn't reach for the right drawer. He didn't know. Cat Henry said into the phone, now voice softening. "Yes, love, I'll be home for dinner." "No, he won't be a problem. I know how to take care of my brother." John could hear the smile, could see it through the wood. The old ache tried to rise. He pinned it down with reason. Henry left. The house exhaled. John stepped out, token in his pocket, tapes in his bag, ledger under his arm. In the hall mirror, the soldier looked less like someone returning and more like someone arriving at last. He went back to the study and dialed Graves. "I have the bolt," he said when the lawyer answered. "And maybe the key." "Good," Graves replied. "Because Henry's counsel just filed. They're asking the court tomorrow morning to restrict your access to the shipyard systems pending evaluation." "How early?" 9. John looked at the token in his palm. The digits shifted 741326. In 30 seconds, they'd become a different truth. What if he said, staring at the numbers as if they were a pulse? "We get what we need before 9. The night was a machine breathing through the hum of power lines and the distant growl of engines on the bridge. John drove through it without headlights. For a stretch, the dashboard lights dimmed as if stealth were a ritual that calmed him. The city around him was faceless, glass and steel pretending to sleep. But every tower, every lamppost felt like an accomplice in Henry's world. At 1:13 a.m., he parked in the industrial district near the shipyard's headquarters. The building loomed ahead, a monolith of tinted glass and concrete. The sign still read Sullivan Maritime Group, though it might as well have said property of Henry Sullivan. He used the old service entrance, the one his father had insisted be kept even after renovations. He'd spent enough nights here as a boy tagging along while his father worked late to know the layout by muscle memory. The security system chirped when he keyed in the old code. Outdated, but still linked to the original server, the one he could reach with the token. He slipped on gloves and sat at a desk in the dark, the monitor's glow painting his face in electric blue. He plugged in the token-typed credentials that felt like prayers. The system hesitated, then accepted. A second later, the private accounts appeared. Rows of numbers blinked on the screen. Transfers, vendor codes, timestamps. John leaned forward. "Breathe, soldier." Each line was a bullet trajectory. Oaktide, Tethys, Brindle, Carthage. Funds looping through the same 3 banks, same days each quarter. Clean symmetry, almost beautiful in its deceit. Then he found what he hadn't expected. An automated transfer scheduled for tomorrow, 09:30 a.m. Amount, $5,000. $1,000 recipient, Carthage Capital Source, Sullivan Maritime Group. Consolidated trust account. He clicked details. The digital signature was Henry's. The approval timestamp was already registered, pre-signed, meaning Henry had prepared the transfer in advance, expecting that by the time it executed, John's access would already be frozen by court order. The timing was perfect. A single day's difference would determine who owned the company's future. John copied the transaction data to a flash drive. Then he opened the audit logs. Timestamps of every login session. One line caught his eye: access admin. IP 172.22.91.4. Date 02/11, 02:04 a.m. User RS Legacy Token. RS Legacy Token. His father's credentials used 3 nights before his death, but the token, the one he now held, hadn't been touched since his father sealed it. Someone had cloned it. or stolen it, briefly used it, returned it. He printed the logs, his hands steady despite the pulse in his ears. Then a soft click echoed through the hall. Footsteps. John turned off the monitor, melted into shadow. The glass wall at the end of the corridor reflected a figure in the faint light. Henry. He was alone, coat unbuttoned, phone in one hand. John watched from this corner as his brother moved toward the same server room, muttering to himself. Henry inserted a keycard and typed a code on the console. The system unlocked with a low chime. John couldn't see his expression clearly, but he recognized the posture. Predatory calm, the way a man moves when he's about to bury evidence. Henry plugged in a small drive. The server's status light blinked red. John's mind raced. He's wiping logs. He stepped out of the dark before he could talk himself out of it. You always did like working nights. Henry froze. The red light flickered on his face like a heartbeat. John, he said softly. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you. Henry smiled without turning. You have no idea how fragile everything is. You think this company runs on blueprints and integrity. It runs on leverage. On knowing when to make a lie look like a promise. John walked closer. And when to make a death look like an accident. That made Henry turn. His eyes glinted. Not fear, not guilt, but calculation. You think I killed him, he said. That's what all this righteous prowling is about. I think you stood to gain more than anyone. And I think you've been cleaning up ever since. Henry chuckled. Always the soldier. Always the believer in good and evil. Let me teach you something Father never could. There's no justice without ownership. The man who signs the check writes the truth. He held up the drive. This contains every transaction, every signature. I can delete or rewrite it all. And when the court freezes your access tomorrow, you'll have nothing but stories. John's voice was ice. You're wrong. He lifted his own flash drive. Because I already have what I need. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The hum of the servers filled the room. Then Henry's expression cracked. Fury slicing through the mask. You've been snooping, he hissed. Breaking into company property, hacking accounts. You think the law will side with a thief? The law will side with proof, John said. Henry's laugh was sharp-breaking. Proof against me. You forget who my lawyers are. By the time you wave that flash drive in court, I'll have 5 experts swearing it's fabricated. And the judge. She owes me a favor, the kind you can't subpoena. He stepped forward, voice dropping. You can't win, John. Not in court, not in blood. You were always too sentimental to kill a man, and too honest to lie well enough to survive. John's eyes hardened. Maybe, but I'm not alone. Henry's brow creased, meaning, Father didn't just trust me, he trusted Graves. The motion's already filed. Henry froze. The first hint of panic ghosted across his face. You're bluffing. Check the docket in the morning, John said. Probate petition, Exhibit A, forensic ledger. Exhibit B, transaction logs. Exhibit C, the motion to freeze accounts. Everything you erased tonight will be in front of a judge by 9. Henry's hand twitched. The flash drive dropped clattering onto the tile. You stupid, he began, but John was already moving. He kicked the drive toward the wall, bent and picked it up. You taught me something once, John said quietly. Always finish the play. Henry lunged, grabbing his arm. The two brothers struggled in silence. No shouts, no threats. Only the sound of breath and friction and years of unspoken war. John twisted free with trained precision, shoving Henry back into the desk. The monitor toppled, glass shattering like a final signature. Henry caught himself panting. You'll regret this, he said, voice low, venomous. You have no idea what I've built. John looked down at him. You built nothing. You inherited and infected. Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. John turned toward the door. Enjoy the morning, brother. It'll be your last as a free man. He left Henry standing amid the wreckage, breathing like an animal that has tasted its own blood. The sky was gray by the time John reached Graves' office. He handed over the flash drives, the printed logs, the token. Graves studied him in silence, then said, You look like your father did when he signed his first injunction. Calm, but with that quiet terror of knowing you've crossed a line you can't uncross. John dropped into the chair. He tried to delete everything. And you stopped him. I delayed him. That's enough, Graves said. The motion was accepted. The judge signed a temporary freeze on all transfers pending review. Henry will find out in about, he checked his watch, 30 minutes. John leaned back, exhaustion bleeding into the cold. And then he'll call, then he'll threaten, then he'll negotiate. And we'll let him. John turned to the window. The sun was rising weakly over the harbor light, reflecting off the cranes like broken glass. What happens if I lose? He asked quietly. Graves considered him. Then you walk away knowing you fought with proof, not vengeance. But I don't think you'll lose. Men like Henry always forget one thing. Greed leaves fingerprints even on numbers. John nodded slowly. And if I win, then you decide what kind of man victory makes you. Outside, a ship's horn bellowed through the morning fog, long, low, and mournful. The city was waking. So was the storm. John stood. Then let's make him remember what our name used to mean. Later, alone in the empty parking lot, John lit a cigarette. A habit he'd sworn off in the desert, but somehow needed now. He watched the smoke curl into the cold air, disappearing faster than he could follow. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think freezing accounts freezes me? You've only bought time. Blood is thicker than law. H. John stared at the screen, then deleted the message. Blood is thicker than law, he thought. Maybe. But law outlasts blood. He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his heel, and walked toward the edge of the pier, where the water caught the first glint of sunlight. Behind him the city stirred. Ahead the tide turned. He whispered to the wind, not as a soldier, not as a son, but as a man reclaiming what was taken. The war starts now. The news broke 3 days after the court order. It started as a quiet leak. A few lines on a business blog no one outside the maritime industry cared to read. But by evening, it had spread to every major outlet in the city. Decorated war veteran accused of corporate espionage in family-owned conglomerate. John stared at the headline on his phone, the letters looking almost harmless in the sterile white of the screen. But the text beneath was anything but. Sources close to the Sullivan family claim that John Sullivan recently returned from active duty, illegally accessed company systems, and manipulated financial records in an apparent attempt to wrest control of the family business from his brother Henry Sullivan. Psychological experts consulted by our reporters suggest that Mr. Sullivan may be suffering from post-combat trauma and delusional paranoia following his military service in Africa. The article was written in the measured tone of someone who pretended not to enjoy the blood. John sat in Graves' office, the blinds half drawn against the afternoon glare. On the desk lay 3 newspapers, 1 tablet, and a silence that felt rehearsed. Graves took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He's faster than I thought. John didn't look up. He's been planning this since before Father died. Graves nodded. It's a classic inversion strategy. You hit your opponent with the accusation you know is coming. Preempt the narrative, own the language. By the time we prove anything, the world has already decided which version feels true. John's phone buzzed again. Another notification. This time it was from a television segment. The anchor smiled into the camera. The professional empathy of her voice honed to a blade. It's a tragic story. A returning soldier, a broken family, a fortune at stake. We reached out to Henry Sullivan for comment earlier today. They cut to a clip of Henry standing outside his office, flanked by lawyers and flashbulbs. He looked composed, grief-polished. His voice was soft, humble, perfectly measured. John's been through so much. We all have. My only concern is his well-being. He's not the same since he came back. I love my brother. I always will. But right now I have to protect the company and our father's legacy from instability. Graves muted the screen. He just called you dangerous, he said, but politely enough to make people nod. John leaned back. His reflection in the darkened monitor was faint, almost transparent. It's a strange thing, he said quietly, to be erased by sympathy, erased by... Meanwhile, across town, Kat sat on the balcony of the apartment Henry had chosen for them, the one overlooking the park with its manicured trees and sterile calm. She hadn't been able to sleep in days. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages, calls, comments. Classmates from med school, journalists pretending to be friends, even professors wanting to confirm details. One message came from her old roommate, Lila. Kat, tell me it's not true. You married into this mess. They're saying John hacked the company and tried to blame Henry. Are you okay? Kat didn't reply. She just stared at the rain collecting on the balcony railing. Each drop merged with another, formed small rivers slid off the edge. Quiet, determined, gone. Inside, Henry's voice carried from the living room. He was on the phone, his tone smooth, deliberate. Yes. Keep it emotional. Humanize the story. Emphasize his trauma. No, don't use unstable, use fragile. Softer. And make sure the photos show him in uniform. The public loves soldiers, but only when they're broken. Kat closed her eyes. Something inside her, something small and human, twisted. She walked back inside. Henry ended the call and smiled as if nothing had happened. You've seen the news. Yes. Good, he said. It's working. Sympathy sells faster than truth. She stood there, the words barely forming. You're destroying him. Henry poured himself a drink. No, he said calmly. I'm containing him. She watched the ice swirl in his glass. You lied about him once, she said softly. Now you're doing it again. He met her gaze. You think he's innocent? Kat hesitated. I think he's grieving. I think he's trying to understand what happened to his father. Our father, Henry corrected automatically. She almost laughed. He was yours when you needed his name, but not when he needed your truth. Henry's eyes hardened, but his voice remained level. You don't understand the world we live in, Kat. The company feeds 500 families. Banks, suppliers, clients, they don't like instability. If the board senses scandal, they'll pull contracts, the shares will drop, the press will swarm. Then no one wins. So this is about control, she said. This is about survival, he replied. You don't fight fire with honesty. You fight it with better smoke. Kat wanted to say something, but the words never arrived. They just broke against the wall of his calm. When he turned away, she whispered, he trusted you. Henry didn't turn back. That was his first mistake. Back at Graves' office, John stared at the motion Henry's legal team had filed that morning. Motion to disqualify counsel. Filed by Sullivan Maritime Group. Claim conflict of interest. Thomas Graves previously represented both sons under joint family trust. Ongoing representation of John Sullivan constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. They're trying to remove me, Graves said. Force you to hire new counsel, delay proceedings. John's voice was steady. Can they win? Graves hesitated. If the judge is cautious, yes, temporarily. Which would give Henry time to move funds offshore before an injunction can be renewed. John rubbed his temples. He's buying the clock. He's always known time is the most expensive currency, Graves said. The older man leaned forward. Listen to me, John. What Henry's doing isn't just manipulation. It's narrative warfare. The courtroom isn't the only battlefield now. You need a counterstory. I don't do stories, John said coldly. Then you'll lose, Graves said quietly. Because the truth without audience is just a whisper. That night, John went home to an empty house. The staff had been instructed not to speak to him. Their politeness was brittle rehearsed. He sat in the study, the same room where his father had died. The clock ticked indifferent. He turned on the TV for noise, but it was Henry again. Another interview, this time softer, more emotional. My brother's not a villain, Henry said, voice trembling just enough. He's just lost. He's been through hell and I forgive him. But I can't let him hurt the people who depend on me. The reporter leaned forward. You mean the company? Henry smiled, humble. The family. And yes, the company. They're the same to me. The segment cut to archival footage. Henry helping workers during a storm, shaking hands, hugging old employees. The story had already chosen its hero. John muted the TV. The light from the screen flickered across the walls, turning his reflection into a ghost. He thought of his father's last words, be calmer than the liar. But what if calm was no longer enough? Across town, Kat sat alone on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet. Her phone buzzed again. A new headline. Insider reveals. John Sullivan showed signs of mental instability before father's death. She clicked it despite herself. The article cited an anonymous source from within the family. The quotes were vague but recognizable. He talked about being watched. Said his brother was hiding something. He stopped sleeping. It was like he came back from the war but never really returned. Kat covered her mouth. She remembered that conversation. Exactly those words. Spoken not to Henry, not to anyone from the press, but to her one night when she had begged him to open up. She whispered, oh my God. The realization hit like cold water. Henry hadn't just lied. He'd weaponized her compassion. At 3:17 a.m., she found herself driving without knowing where to. The city passed in blurs. Billboards, glass lights. She ended up in front of the old Sullivan mansion. The gate was locked, but she knew the side entrance still had the broken latch. She slipped through, her breath clouding in the chill. Inside, the house was quiet except for the soft hum of electricity. Machines keeping ghosts alive. She went straight to the study. John was there, sitting in the dark. He didn't move when she entered. You shouldn't be here. I know. For a moment, they said nothing. Just the clock ticking between them. They're saying terrible things about you, she said finally. I've heard worse. They're using my words, she whispered. Things I said to you. About how you couldn't sleep. How you kept hearing footsteps when there weren't any. Henry must have been listening, or you told him, John said quietly. She froze. You think I'd do that? I think you did once, he said. When you believed I was dead? Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. And if I did? I'm sorry. I believed the man who told me you were gone. I believed the only person left. He looked up finally, and for the first time since coming home there was something human. Not anger, but exhaustion too deep for hate. Then stop believing him now, he said. Kat stepped closer. He's not going to stop John. He'll destroy everything you touch. You can't fight him in court. He owns the lawyers, the press, the board. He owns the story. John's jaw tightened. Then I'll change the ending. How? He looked at her, the soldier still in his eyes. By telling the truth so loudly it breaks the script. She reached for him, but her hand stopped halfway, fingers trembling in the space between them. Be careful, she whispered. You're not the only one he can ruin. John's reply was almost a whisper. He already did. Outside, the first light of morning began to cut through the clouds. Somewhere in the city, a journalist drafted another article. Somewhere else, a lawyer prepared a counter-motion. And in a quiet room filled with ghosts and paper, two people stood between the weight of evidence and the collapse of everything that once held meaning. The courthouse smelled like rain and paper, that sterile bureaucratic mix that made even truth feel procedural. Reporters crowded the steps, their microphones thrust forward like bayonets. Flashbulbs popped, painting the morning in artificial lightning. John stepped out of the car beside Thomas Graves, the old lawyer, steady despite the chaos. He wore no expression, only presence. John, in his dark suit, looked less like a defendant and more like a man walking into weather he had already measured. Inside, the corridors buzzed. Low voices, legal jargon, whispers that travel faster than sound. Henry was already there, perfectly assembled, flanked by two high-profile attorneys from Dawson and Blake, LLP. His tie was a deep navy, the color of control. When he saw John, he smiled. Not warmth, not welcome, just ownership, Brother Henry said softly as they passed. Try not to embarrass the family. John didn't slow down. You already did. The courtroom was modern. Glass walls, recessed lighting microphones that made even silence sound amplified. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, adjusted her glasses and called the room to order. The clerk read out the case, Sullivan Maritime Group et al. Versus John Richard Sullivan. Petition for injunction. Motion to disqualify counsel. Allegations of data tampering and fraudulent access. The words filled the air like smoke, formal, suffocating. Henry's lawyer stood first. Polished, immaculate. Your Honor, this is not a matter of inheritance, but of integrity. Mr. John Sullivan illegally accessed private systems, altered company data, and interfered with lawful corporate operations. We present Exhibits A through E, as well as testimony from internal employees and medical evaluations indicating unstable behavior consistent with post-combat psychological stress. A murmur rippled through the room. The lawyer let it linger. He continued. We also have a witness, Dr. Catherine Mendez Sullivan, who can speak to Mr. Sullivan's mental state prior to his father's death. John's stomach tightened. Cat, Graves leaned in and whispered, he's using her to authenticate the emotional narrative. It's textbook manipulation. John's jaw tensed. Let him. Cat entered the courtroom looking like a ghost of herself. Pale, sleepless, and dressed too carefully, the kind of perfection that hurts. Her eyes flicked toward John for only a second before she sat. The lawyer began gentle at first. Mrs. Sullivan, you were close to both brothers, correct? Yes. Her voice was small, almost childlike. You knew John before he enlisted? I did. And after he returned? A pause, yes. Would you say he was changed? Cat hesitated. Anyone would be. But more than most, sometimes he was quiet, withdrawn. The lawyer nodded empathetically as though consoling her. Did he ever express paranoia? Fear that someone was against him. She closed her eyes briefly. He said, he thought Henry was hiding something. And did he act on those suspicions? Cat swallowed. He asked questions. He went through files. In your opinion, was he stable? She looked at John again. He wasn't pleading, wasn't angry, just waiting. Like a man listening to a verdict that had already happened long before today. I think, she said, finally, voice breaking, just slightly, he was lost. Henry's lawyer smiled, turning to the judge. No further questions. Graves rose slowly. Mrs. Sullivan? He said, his voice calm but sharp. When you say lost, do you mean dangerous? No, Cat said quickly. Not dangerous. Thank you. And when he said he believed his brother was hiding something, did you think he was wrong? Cat hesitated. Henry's eyes burned into her. I didn't know what to think. Did you know, Graves said, stepping closer, that 3 days before Mr. Richard Sullivan's death, Henry Sullivan approved 2 offshore transfers totaling $3.6 million from company accounts without dual authorization? The courtroom stirred. Henry's lawyer objected, irrelevant, speculative, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled. Proceed. Graves handed Cat a printed document. These are your father-in-law's notes, Mrs. Sullivan. Do you recognize his handwriting? Yes, she whispered. Read the highlighted line, please. Her hands shook. If I die, this is the cause. A silence fell that felt almost holy. Graves took back the page, turned to the bench. Your Honor, we intend to prove that Henry Sullivan used fraudulent vendors to siphon company funds, and that our client John Sullivan uncovered this while attempting to fulfill his fiduciary duty as a co-owner. The narrative of instability is not concern, it's cover. Henry's lawyer's smile faltered. Graves continued, steady as a metronome. We have electronic logs authenticated by third-party forensics, a legacy token registered to the late Richard Sullivan's name and footage, recovered from the shipyard warehouse dated 1 week before his death. The judge looked up sharply. Footage? Yes, Your Honor, Graves said, showing Henry Sullivan personally authorizing a double shipment entry, 2 invoices, 1 delivery. Henry's lawyer leaned to whisper, but Henry's face had gone rigid pale. Graves motioned to the bailiff. If it pleases the court. The lights dimmed slightly. The video began. It was grainy, but clear enough. Henry standing near the loading bay, clipboard in hand, speaking to the foreman. The audio crackled. Run it again, Henry said. But sir, it's the same batch. Then call it a quality check. Paperwork needs to match volume. The clip ended. The silence that followed was no longer bureaucratic. It was human. Graves let it breathe before speaking. The transaction records align with the date and time of that footage. 2 invoices were paid. 1 load was delivered. Henry's lawyer scrambled, voice tight. Your Honor, we question the authenticity of this evidence. The judge cut him off. You'll have your chance to question it on record. For now, the court acknowledges its relevance. Graves sat down slowly. The truth, he murmured to John, doesn't shout. It waits. Outside, the reporters pounced. The courthouse steps had become a theater of flashbulbs and verdicts spoken in sound bites. Henry exited first, surrounded by his lawyers. Cameras swarmed him, voices firing questions. Mr. Sullivan, do you deny the authenticity of the video? Did your father suspect financial misconduct? Is it true your brother uncovered offshore transfers? Henry smiled, but the charm was cracking. The video is taken out of context. The rest will be handled legally. Kat came out next. Microphones turned toward her. Mrs. Sullivan, you testified that John was unstable. Do you stand by that? Do you believe your husband? She paused at the top of the steps, rain starting to fall in faint, polite drops. Her hair clung to her face, her eyes bright under the lights. I believe she said carefully that the truth doesn't need protection. Only liars do. The crowd erupted. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Inside the courthouse, John stood by the window watching her speak. He couldn't hear her words, but he could see Henry's face tightening in the reflection of a nearby monitor. She just chose a side, Graves said quietly. John nodded, and so did the city. Night again. The headlines shifted faster than anyone could control. Video leaked in Sullivan case. Henry's double billing scandal. Whistleblower or thief. John Sullivan's fight for legacy. Sources claim widow turned against Henry Sullivan. The tide was changing, but John felt no triumph. Only fatigue and a faint ache that truth once released had its own hunger. He sat in the dark, the flicker of a muted TV painting his hands in cold light. Graves called once to confirm the audit freeze had been extended. The judge had ordered a full forensic review of company records. Henry's accounts were locked. But the victory tasted like ashes. Kat hadn't called. She hadn't needed to. When the knock came at the door around midnight, he didn't move at first. Then, another knock, softer. He opened it. Kat stood there, rain-soaked, exhausted, but alive in a way he hadn't seen in years. I told the truth, she said simply. I saw. I thought it would feel better. It doesn't, John said. She smiled faintly. No, it never does. They sat in silence. The house creaked, the world outside, reassembling itself around new truths. After a long while, she said, He won't stop. Even if he loses, he'll find another way. I know, John said, but this time he'll have to fight without lies. And you? She asked softly. What do you have left? John looked toward the study door. His father's chair still in shadow. What he tried to teach us, he said. That integrity doesn't win fast, it wins last. At dawn, the headlines had changed again. Court orders full audit of Sullivan Maritime. Henry Sullivan temporarily suspended pending investigation. Henry's empire had begun to bleed in public. Board members called emergency meetings. The banks froze lending lines. Investors demanded statements. The world Henry built on perception was collapsing under its own weight. Kat watched the news in silence. She felt no triumph either. Only relief mixed with grief. Henry had been her husband, her jailer, her shame, her refuge. All of them at once. Now he was just another name read on television. She turned off the screen and stared at her reflection, pale, tired, free in the quietest way freedom ever comes. Somewhere across town, Henry was alone too in his office watching the same broadcast. His expression was unreadable, almost calm. He poured himself a drink, let the glass sweat in his hand. Then he whispered to the empty room. War isn't over, little brother. It just changed hands. Meanwhile, John walked through the shipyard at sunrise. The cranes stood still, their silhouettes against the orange sky like rusted monuments. The air smelled of salt and iron and something clean. Not peace, but the start of it. He paused where his father once stood, looking out toward the water. The tide was low, revealing the dark bones of the dock. He thought of Henry's last words of Kat's eyes when she told the truth of the letter his father wrote. The war was quieter now, but still there. The war for what remains decent in men who have seen too much. He whispered almost to the sea. We build again. And the waves answered as they always do. Without judgment, without applause, just the steady rhythm of time, outliving everyone's lies. The storm had passed, but the city still looked bruised. 3 months had gone by since the court's decision froze Henry's control over Sullivan Maritime. The audit had confirmed everything. The shell companies, the offshore transfers, the forged authorizations. The board had stripped him of all titles pending criminal charges. His lawyers fought in circles. His empire rotted in headlines. To the public, it was justice. To John, it was quiet. Too quiet. He stood by the docks at dawn, the same place he used to meet his father every Sunday. The cranes had begun to move again. Slowly, like tired giants waking from years of servitude. Workers nodded as he passed, cautious, respectful. They still didn't know how to treat him. Hero traitor? Or simply the last Sullivan left standing? He didn't care. He'd rebuilt the shipyard's core contracts, reopened payrolls, and made sure every worker's family kept their home. But peace. Peace was something else. Peace didn't come with signatures or verdicts. It came, if at all, in fragments. And some fragments cut when you touched them. Kat still lived in the city, but not with Henry. And not with John either. She'd taken a small apartment near the hospital, resumed her medical internship. She avoided journalists, neighbors, anything with a camera. The tabloids had painted her as the woman between two brothers, a caricature she could never wash off completely. Sometimes she called John, sometimes she didn't. The conversations were short, polite, almost weightless. That morning she appeared at the shipyard unannounced. A simple white coat over her dress, her hair tied back. The look of someone learning to stand again. You shouldn't be here, John said, though not unkindly. I wanted to see it, she set her eyes on the ships. The place your father built. The one you almost lost. He nodded. It's strange. Everyone talks about inheritance like it's money, but really it's just what's left after forgiveness fails. She looked at him for a long time. Do you hate him? John didn't answer right away. The river wind tugged at his coat. I don't think about him enough to hate him. He's finished. Kat smiled sadly. No one like Henry ever really finishes. They just find new ways to live inside people's memories. Then I'll learn to remember him without giving him power. She exhaled, watching a ship glide slowly from the dock. I testified because I had to, not because I wanted to hurt him. I know. I thought it would fix something inside me, but it didn't. John turned to her. Justice isn't medicine, Kat. It doesn't heal. It just stops the bleeding long enough to start over. Her eyes softened. And have you started over? He looked out at the water. Not yet. I'm still learning how to exist without a war. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the low hum of engines, the distant clang of steel on steel, the language of rebuilding. That evening, John met Graves in the same office where it all began. The old lawyer looked older now, his suit looser, his eyes tired but kind. The investigation's done, Graves said. Henry's been indicted. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery. It'll take years to unwind everything. John nodded. He'll fight it. Of course. Men like Henry don't accept defeat. They negotiate with it. Will he go to prison? Graves sighed. Maybe. Or maybe he'll buy just enough mercy to survive without redemption. Either way, the company's yours now. John looked at the folder on the desk. The official transfer of control stamped and sealed. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like inheritance in its purest form, responsibility weighted with ghosts. He signed anyway. Graves poured 2 fingers of whiskey, slid 1 glass across. To your father, he said. John raised it. To truth. They drank. The silence after burned more than the alcohol. 2 weeks later, Henry called. It was unexpected. A number John almost didn't recognize, traced from an unregistered phone. When he answered, the voice on the other end was quieter than he remembered, stripped of its polish. You won, Henry said. John didn't respond. I thought about hating you, Henry continued. But then I realized, we're the same. We both did what we had to do to survive. John's voice was calm but sharp. You lied. You stole. You killed a man who trusted you. Henry laughed softly. And you destroyed your family to avenge him. Tell me which one of us did father raise better? The line went silent for a moment. Then Henry said, enjoy the company. You'll find it emptier than you think. The call ended. John stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. For the first time in months, he didn't feel anger, just fatigue. The kind that seeps into the bones and stays there. A month later, Henry disappeared. No one knew where. His lawyers stalled, his accounts were frozen. His apartment left half-packed. Some said he fled abroad. Others whispered darker endings. John didn't ask. Some ghosts you don't go looking for, you just let the water carry them away. Winter arrived early that year. The city lights reflected off the river like fractured glass. John worked late most nights, rebuilding systems, hiring back old managers, making the company honest again, or at least trying to. One night, as he was locking up, he found a small box on his desk. No note. Inside was a silver compass, old but functional, his father's. It had been missing since the funeral. The needle quivered, then steadied north. He smiled faintly. Even broken things remember where to go. Kat came by again before Christmas. The shipyard was quieter now, the cranes silhouetted against a red sky. I heard about Henry, she said softly. They still haven't found him. John nodded. Maybe it's better that way. She hesitated. Do you ever think about us? He looked at her, and there was no bitterness in his face, only something like peace. All the time. But thinking about what's gone isn't the same as wanting it back. She nodded. I understand. They stood at the railing, watching the river carry fragments of light downstream. Reflections of a city moving on. Kat whispered. I wish things had been different. John smiled gently. If they had, maybe we wouldn't have learned who we really were. She looked at him, eyes glistening. And who are we now? He turned toward the horizon, where the first cargo ship of the season was setting out its horn, low and solemn. Just survivors, he said, trying not to become what broke us. Kat's hand brushed his. A gesture without promise, without history, just presence. They stayed like that for a while, silent until the sky went dark. That night, John wrote a letter to Graves before leaving the office. Thomas, if the company stands again, it will not be because we won. It will be because we endured. My father used to say, legacy is not what we leave, but what refuses to die after we do. I think I finally understand that now. Tell the board we'll rename the main vessel next season, RS Legacy. He signed it, left it on the desk, and stepped outside. The air was cold clean. Somewhere far off, a ship's horn sounded, long and patient like memory itself. He walked toward the pier hands in pockets, watching the tide rise around the pilings. The night reflected the city lights, fragments of something broken still managing to shine. And for the first time in years, John felt something that wasn't anger or grief or vengeance, just the quiet ache of living, and the fragile, stubborn pulse of moving forward. The river was frozen that winter, a gray mirror cracked by ice and light. The shipyard slept under a quiet veil of snow. Work had slowed, not from failure, but from exhaustion. Reconstruction, even of steel, demanded a kind of endurance no war could teach. John arrived early each morning, his breath clouding in the cold. The office lights flickered on, one by one, chasing away the dark like reluctant witnesses. It had been 6 months since Henry vanished. No trace, no word, no body. The police investigation had stalled. The journalists had moved on. The world had other tragedies to feed on. But John hadn't moved on. The company ran smoother now. Transparent accounts, renewed contracts, worker bonuses reinstated. He'd turned down interviews, awards, even an invitation to speak at a veterans conference. I've said enough, he told Graves once. Let the work speak. Yet every night, when the office emptied, the silence came back. The old kind, the one that didn't echo but waited. Sometimes he'd find himself replaying Henry's last words on the phone. You'll find it emptier than you think. He had. That morning, a letter waited on his desk. Unmarked, hand-delivered, sealed with wax. No return address. Inside was a single page, typed, not handwritten. You built your truth on what I left behind. You think justice ends where guilt begins. It doesn't. You inherited my blood as much as my debt. Look deeper into the contracts you've signed these past months. Not everything that carries your name is clean. You'll know where to find me when you understand what legacy truly means. John read it twice, then again. He called Graves immediately. The lawyer sounded wary. Are you certain it's from him? Who else writes like a ghost, John said. Graves sighed. What does he mean, contracts you've signed? John pulled up recent files on his computer. Vendor renewals, joint ventures, ship orders. Everything clean. Or so he'd thought. Then he sought a new contract authorized by a deputy manager 2 weeks earlier. Bluebridge Logistics registered as a shipping intermediary. A familiar structure, familiar clauses, perfectly legal on paper. He opened the ownership records. The registered address was in Zurich. The proxy director was a lawyer from Panama, and the holding company behind it, Alpheus Holdings Limited, the same name from his father's ledger, the same ghost. Henry hadn't vanished. He'd adapted. That night, John met Graves at a quiet cafe near the financial district. Snow fell outside in soft spirals, muffling the city. Graves skimmed the printouts, his frown deepening. He's laundering influence, not money. Bluebridge isn't about profit. It's about narrative control. It's a logistics intermediary with stakes in 3 regional papers and a digital PR firm. He's rebuilding the web from the outside. Through shell acquisitions. Exactly, he's buying back the public. John leaned back, rubbing his temples. He's turning truth into currency again. Graves nodded. And he's using your own company's contracts to fund it. Each Bluebridge shipment carries an overage fee, small enough to overlook, large enough to matter. In 6 months, he'll have enough capital to re-enter legally. John exhaled slow and cold. He's not after money anymore. He's after narrative redemption. Graves looked up. What will you do? John stared at the window where snow blurred the city lights. Find him. He found him in Vienna. The trail led through encrypted emails, a Swiss subsidiary, and a wire transfer routed through a trust. Henry had always loved sophistication and deceit. It made his sins look like art. The address was an old hotel near the Danube, the kind with marble floors and too much silence. John walked through the lobby, boots echoing faintly. The clerk didn't ask questions. Money buys invisibility in places like this. Room 314. He knocked once. When the door opened, Henry looked older, thinner. His hair grayer at the edges, but the eyes, those sharp, charming eyes, were the same. The devil doesn't age, he just edits, Brother Henry said softly. You found me. John stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You left breadcrumbs. Henry smiled faintly. I wanted you to. The room was immaculate. Maps on the table, a laptop open, contracts spread out like blueprints. The machinery of rebirth. What is this? John asked. Legacy, Henry said simply. The world doesn't care about guilt. It only remembers the last version of the story. I'm building mine. You're laundering lies again, Henry chuckled. You still don't see it. You think truth wins by being true. But truth only wins when people want it more than comfort, and people don't. And John's voice was flat. Then what do you want? Henry looked at him, almost tender. I want you to join me. John froze. You've spent a year cleaning the company, paying debts, earning nothing but peace and paperwork. For what? To die righteous. We can rebuild everything together, properly this time. No lies, just precision, efficiency. Control, John said. Order, Henry corrected. Our father built ships. We can build empires. Different tools, same vision. John laughed quietly, a sound without humor. You haven't changed. I've evolved, Henry said. You should too. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were new contracts. Ventures under John's company's name, pre-approved by minor executives masked as expansions. If John signed them, Bluebridge would become legitimate. Their partnership restored. Publicly clean, privately bound. Henry's voice softened. You can't fight forever, John. You can't spend your life atoning for a war you didn't start. You're not your father's ghost. You're mine. The words hit like a confession. John closed the folder. His heartbeat was steady, his hands calm. You know, he said, Father once told me that power without conscience is just a storm. I used to think he was talking about you. Henry smiled. And now, John looked at him. Really looked. And for a moment, he didn't see a villain. He saw a man built by the same house, the same silence, the same hunger, 2 sides of the same inheritance. I think he was warning me, John said quietly. Henry's smile faded. So what now? You turn me in again? No, John said. I end it. He picked up the folder and tore it in half. The papers fell like snow. Henry's calm cracked, but only slightly. You think that changes anything? I have backups, investors, people who believe in me. They believed in a myth, John said. And myths die when you stop feeding them. He stepped closer. You've built your life on fear. Father's cat's mine. But fear doesn't last. It just changes hands. Henry's eyes flared, but then softened into something that looked almost like sorrow. You can destroy me, John, but you'll spend the rest of your life making sure I don't return. You'll never sleep easy. You'll become the ghost you hunted. John shook his head. No, I'll become the man Father wanted you to be. Henry laughed, tired, bitter. You think virtue keeps you warm? No, John said, turning to leave. But it keeps me human. He opened the door. Henry didn't stop him. Behind him, the room stayed silent. The maps, the papers, the empire that could have been. All of it already fading into irrelevance. Back in the city, John reported Bluebridge's structure to the authorities. The investigation spread quickly, cutting off Henry's last connections. The headlines called it the second collapse, but John didn't read the papers. He returned to work, rebuilt what could be rebuilt, and let time do what vengeance never could: erase noise. Weeks later, he received another letter. No signature, only a short line. Even truth needs an enemy to stay alive. He didn't reply. He folded the letter, placed it in his father's old notebook, and locked it away. One evening, Kat came by the shipyard again. The cranes stood against a silver sky, motionless and monumental. She found John in his office packing away files. "They said you've been promoted to chair of the Maritime Board," she said softly. "I didn't want it," he replied. "But maybe someone honest should take the seat before someone else does." She smiled faintly. "That's not ambition, that's damage control." He shrugged. "Maybe they're the same thing." They stood in silence for a while. Then she said, "I heard Henry's been spotted in Prague." Or maybe it was a rumor. "It's always a rumor," John said. She stepped closer. "Does it bother you that he's still out there?" He looked out the window. The river reflected the pale light like steel. "No. The world needs its devils. They remind the rest of us why we build better." Kat nodded, tears in her eyes, but no sadness in them. Only understanding. "You're not the same man who left for war," she said. "No," he said quietly. "And neither is he. Do you ever miss what we were?" He turned to her, a faint smile. "Sometimes. But then I remember what it cost." She reached out, touched his arm gently. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't let the truth turn you into him." John looked at her, then at the shipyard below. The men working the machines, humming the slow rebirth of something honest. "I won't," he said, "because he taught me exactly how that happens." That night, John walked it down to the pier. Snow fell again, softer this time. The river was thawing, the ice breaking apart in long, silent fractures. He watched the water move, slow but alive, carrying shards of winter out to sea. He thought of his father's words, of Henry's ghosts, of Kat's quiet courage. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted. He felt whole. He took the compass from his coat pocket, the one his father had left him. The needle wavered, then pointed north, steady as a promise. He whispered to the wind the same words he'd said long ago: "We build again." The wind carried them across the dark, where even broken things could find direction. Hit subscribe. If you've ever been hurt, betrayed, or wanted revenge, then this is your place. Like, share, and subscribe to Booze. N, where real stories cut deeper than any fiction ever could. You don't want to miss what's next.